So thank you very much for having me. And I particularly thank John and Janai for, or should I say Janai and John, for having me along here today. It's one of the things I love most in my time here in America is speaking about the greatness of America, speaking about its exceptionalism, speaking about what it is to be an American and what it is to be an exceptional people. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. It is really a pleasure. I want to begin by saying that I had from a very early age believed that there was something very special and something very good and honourable about America. In childlike simplicity, I loved Superman. And I loved the calling card that he came with, truth, justice and the American way. I loved Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. And their song at the end, happy trails to you until we meet again. I mean, there was something really good about that message that Roy Rogers was giving us. I even named my tricycle after Trigger. And I'm glad you all laughed because if there was younger people here, I was going to say, yes, some of you are wondering who the heck is Trigger. Ask your grandfather or grandmother, they would know. I also loved Father Knows Best and the sense of family wholesomeness it brought to my world, having lost a sister and a brother before I was 7, and watching a father that was once so disciplined turn to alcohol to dull the pain of losing his 2 oldest children to these accidents. Sadly, he blamed himself for the death and loss of their life. Not correctly, but he did. And he passed away 10 days before my 17th birthday. All these programs that I watched as a child had a sense of goodness about them, wholesome and family orientated. And it was in listening to Donald Trump that I again got a sense of the goodness and wholesomeness that I had not seen in my time here in America since Ronald Reagan. But what really stuck in my mind was a photo that I saw as a 5-year-old in a volume of the children's Bible story. You might recall the 10-volume Bible story that we had as kids. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But it was a painting of a typical American family sitting around a table at dinner time. Father dressed perfectly in his business suit. The 2 children perfectly dressed, groomed for father coming home. And the mother dressed in her white apron, groomed and ready to go out to a ball, carving up the roast. And sitting at the table was a picture of Jesus. He was invited to sit at the table. And it was the platform that this picture represented to a young child that gave me a belief that America was a godly nation. As I grew, I wanted to believe in one nation under God. In God we trust, and in God bless America. These things I really wanted to believe in again, not only for America, but for my own country. So when I came to this country some 8.5 years ago, I believed I was coming to the country where the people included God in their everyday lives. Naive of me, I know, but maybe it's what I wanted to believe. I was coming to the country of Billy Graham, the singing of God Bless America before every football match. One nation under God, and in God we trust on the dollar. This, however, was not the society I found. I was confronted by a culture that seemed lost, that wanted God removed from all aspects of life, from public institutions, from public schools, from the family, from family life, from politics, and from decision making, and in some cases, even the church. And there did not seem to be any fight amongst the American people, certainly not amongst the politicians that I was involved in with my wife. It's almost as if they'd given up, that they feared being labelled. The ingrained fear of expressing our gratitude publicly of how God has blessed this nation was confirmed for me in 2010. I was a campaign manager for the statewide race for Attorney General. The candidate, my wife, was vilified by her own political party, her advisors and the media to dare include faith in her platform and God in her speeches. On many fronts, she was urged to remove these references because it just would not fly in the petri dish state of social re-engineering that is Connecticut. I can tell you, I was confused and I was shocked. I joined the Trump campaign like thousands of others as a volunteer immediately after the Iowa caucuses, because I wanted to believe that if Americans turned their eyes back to the Almighty, the America that I had seen in decline for the past decade and beyond would once again become the beacon of hope and light for the rest of the world, and therefore a beacon of hope and light for my country, Australia. I saw in Trump and his family something of what I saw in the picture I referred to earlier. And I could see that it would be a family like this that would bring America back. And yes, I was to continue to be blessed, having been part of the Trump campaign and then the Trump-Pence campaign. For a few minutes, let me provide a picture of what the Trump-Pence campaign was up against. I saw this impact directly as a California political director and witnessed this across the many states. I went to 15 states during the campaign, making phone calls, handing out signs, door knocking, until I finally got the gig as a political director for California. And that's another story in and of itself. As I travelled from state to state through the primaries, it became evident to me that much of society no longer revered God. Instead, people were being held bondage to things of this world. A new TV, a new car, the latest technology, new Nikes, a new girlfriend, a new baby, or a new wife. And social re-engineering was rampant. I didn't really understand at the time what was wrong, but I got a real sense that this bondage was ingrained into society. And I started asking the question, why? I knew my history, and I understood that at any given time, many of the founding fathers were deists. But my readings told me that most, if not all, believed that a society without a moral and religious foundation would eventually fail. So what had happened? As time went on, I gained more responsibility, including running several large rallies in California. During this period, it became apparent that there was a war going on, a deliberate campaign to remove the mention of God and to re-engineer this country's institutions through control and fear. I heard church leaders saying, we can't take a position on political candidates, political issues, and the social engineering that was going on in this country because of the risk of losing their 501c3 status, or even worse, their congregation. I was really, really quite shocked. Yet it was merely a confirmation of what I had witnessed in the preceding 7 years whilst being involved in campaigning. I began to understand that the demise of American values, ideals and belief systems was being sown in our schools, our higher learning institutions, and indeed our churches, was a direct product of the reluctance of conservatives, of us, to speak up, to fight back, for fear of being shamed or labelled. We had given up. And because of this, the fervent desire to rewrite history, to ensure that reference to God's influence on this country was eradicated forever, to show God was never part of or an influence on her history, or as a foundation for her greatness, all went unchecked. This war has been and is continuing to be waged today by our politicians, our universities, our schools, our legal institutions, and our entertainment industry. But it is more than just a war in people's minds and an eradication of any reference to God's influence on this country. It is an ideological war that, if lost, and we could lose it, will change this country and this world and my country forever. The founding principles of this ideological movement gained relevance in the 20s and 30s and became the platform for a full-scale war against America's values. It's focused on the family and God. Their aim, to establish a socialist state. We all know who Saul Alinsky is. The principles of this movement are ingrained throughout our society. His modus operandi is framed around the following core beliefs. Never refer to socialism. Americans won't buy it. Use softer, less confronting words like liberalism, progressiveness. They'll buy that. The second one is create a politically correct environment to ensure that dissenting conservative views can be demonised. And their number one priority, remove God from society by making government so large and so intrusive that the lie that is the separation of church and state is relevant and applicable in every part of our lives, because that's where government is, in every part of our lives, so they can apply the separation of church and state to it. And this ruling, the lie, SCOTUS in 1947. And that was the platform that set the stage for everything liberal progressives have done since. And Alinsky's principles underlying this represent where we are right now. Do you recognise any of these? Healthcare. Control healthcare and you control the people. Poverty. Increase poverty levels as high as possible. Poor people are easier to control. Debt. Increase the debt to an unsustainable level. Anybody ever heard of that? That way you can increase taxes, and this will produce more poverty. Gun control. Remove the ability of people to defend themselves. Welfare. Take control of every aspect of their lives. Food, housing, and income. You look at the urban plantations. That's exactly what liberal progressives have done. They are controlling everybody in those urban areas. Education. Take control of what people read and listen to. Take control of what children learn. Religion. Remove reference to God from government and schools. And class warfare. Divide the people into the wealthy and the poor. No middle class. This will cause more discontent and it will be easier to take control. I could talk at length about any one of these principles. However, the one principle, the major principle, is to remove God from society. A principle that is diametrically opposed to that which the Founding Fathers recognised as being a fundamental basis for a stable and moral culture. Now, of course, we could argue all day, and I know some people maybe don't believe or whatever, but just bear with me. And just allow me to say God is God, and God controls our moral compass, without which we all have our own moral compass, and therefore we're all going in different directions. We have to have one moral compass, because if we don't have one moral compass, then man can manipulate us, because we don't know. Those that have been at the forefront of trying to bring this country back to the secular pack are everywhere. It's a pack that America was never ever meant to be a part of. America was also always meant to be apart from the pack. So what do? There's three ways. First, they claim that God was never mentioned in the Constitution. Make no mistake, the intent that God provide cover is clear in the statement in Article 7 of your Constitution. I carry my Constitution everywhere because I like to put it in the faces of liberal progressives when they say God is not mentioned in our Constitution. It's a lie. It's Article 7, and it says in part, the ratification of the Convention of States by unanimous consent of the states present. This 17th day of September, 1787, wait for it, in the year of our Lord. The framers declared that their work was done in the year of our Lord. If the framers were interested in removing God from the Constitution or being pluralistic, they would have used what was common in that time, the Common Era, or before the Common Era. But they decided not to. What's more, their reference to our Lord does not, in my opinion, refer to a generic deity. In my view, the Constitution of the United States contains an explicit reference to our Lord. The framers could not have believed the references to God or Christ should be excluded from the Constitution because they didn't exclude it. It's in Article 7, part of your Constitution. What is incredibly stark, though, is the reference to the President's responsibility for signing laws as specified in Article 5, Section 13. It says in part that any bill shall be returned by the President within 10 days. That's all well and good, excepting Sundays. Why is that so? Because they believed that Sunday was a special day in their religion's calendar. It was a day of worship for them. It was a day that people went to church. It was a day they gave thanks to the Lord for what they had been given. John Adams in 1798 said it best: a constitutional republic cannot survive without a moral and religious foundation. He knew, as did many of the founding fathers. The second thing they do is they claim that the Constitution was written without reference to God or the Bible. Further proof of God being fundamental to the framing of the Constitution can be found by examining just a few of the principles drawn from the Federalist Papers and used by the founding fathers as a platform for the Constitution's development. 11 of these principles refer to God directly, and several others refer to virtuous men, virtuous people, and society. They include a free people cannot survive under a republican constitution unless they remain virtuous and morally strong. The most promising method of securing a virtuous and morally stable people is to elect virtuous people. George Washington: without religion, the government of a free people cannot be maintained. Thomas Jefferson, the supposed deist to all the historical pundits: all things were created by God, therefore upon him all mankind is equally dependent, and to him they are equally responsible. All men are created equal. Jefferson. The proper role of government is to protect the equal rights, not provide equal things. The proper role of government is to protect, William Blackstone. Mankind are endowed by God with certain unalienable rights. William Blackstone again: to protect the human rights, God has revealed a code of divine law. He goes on to say, the Bible. Alexander Hamilton: the God-given right to govern is vested in the sovereign authority of the whole people, and jointly developed by all. The United States has a manifest destiny to eventually become a glorious example of God's law under a constitution that will inspire all nations forever. And finally, Alexis de Tocqueville: the core unit which determines the strength of any society is the family. Therefore, the government should foster and protect its integrity. Now, the third claim is that the founding fathers intended there to be a separation of church and state. An absolute fallacy, ruled upon by your Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision in 1947. The First Amendment says in part, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now this is pretty clear. The federal government cannot establish a national church. Again, clear. It doesn't, however, prohibit the government's encouragement of religion. Nor does it mean that our public institutions at all levels and our academic institutions cannot include prayer, thanks to, or mention of the Lord. In fact, I would contend that this very amendment was an intended byproduct of the journey of the Pilgrims, who wanted to establish a society that they could worship God in, free from government interference. Not, though, to exclude God from the administration of their new colony. The content of the Mayflower Compact is clear. We give over this land for the furtherance of the Christian faith. That was the first official document for your country. After the writing of the Constitution, there would be no national church, but there would be national encouragement of faith. There would be no official religion, but the states would nurture as vibrant a faith as the people wished. So solid was this arrangement, so clear the vision of religion and government, that the Supreme Court was not called upon to issue a ruling upon it until 1947, and then under a false premise. And what a disaster that ruling was. A mishmash of laws that could not be correlated, could not be addressed, could not be implemented into our society without our society failing. And they used Jefferson's letter, which was written to the Baptist Association after his election in 1801. And quoting out of context its meaning, the Supreme Court concluded that the intent of the first 10 words of the First Amendment was to build a wall of separation between church and state. Another lie. Jefferson's letter actually said this: I contemplate with sovereign reference that act of whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a Chinese wall or a separation between church and state. He did not change the intent of the Constitution. He reinforced it. Thomas Jefferson understood the importance of God in the new nation and in the daily lives of her people, including both public and private institutions. But he knew that this could only be so if our institutions, foundations and operations were based on Christianity. The answer during an interview when Jefferson was president enforces this point. And the answer is to a question about him going to church. And he says this: Sir, no nation has ever yet existed or been governed without religion. That we know. Nor can be. The Christian religion is the best religion that has been given to man. And I, as the chief magistrate of this nation, am bound to give it the sanction of my example and application in all areas of this nation's business. He believed. He understood. He may not have believed all his life, but he understood that the foundation of this nation was based on Christian principles, even though he might have not have applied it throughout his whole life. Separation of church and state was never meant as it is applied today. Within hours of Congress's adoption of the First Amendment, they asked President George Washington to recommend the American people a day of public thanksgiving and prayer. Within hours. The very next day, Congress passed a resolution saying, in part, that a joint committee of both houses recommend a day of public thanksgiving and prayer with grateful hearts for the favours of Almighty God, especially by affording the opportunity to establish a constitutional republic and its constitution. And Congress extended on an act that originated in 1787 that ordained special lands, and I quote, for the sole use of Christian Indians, and reserved land for civilizing the Indians and promoting Christianity. When this act was renewed, it bore the title, wait for this, an act propagating the gospel among the heathen. This was your Congress in 1787. 3 times during Jefferson's presidency, he signed extensions of this act in law. Not once did he consider vetoing this on the basis that it violated the First Amendment, because it didn't. A quote by Jefferson when he wrote to the Baptist Association of Virginia while Governor of Virginia provides further insight into his belief in God and God's role in this nation. He states, God who gave us life gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his just cannot sleep forever. So you see, from the very beginning, when the Pilgrims arrived at Cape Cod in 1620 and wrote the Mayflower Compact and said that this land is given over for the furtherance of the Christian faith, there was a sense of divine purpose for this great nation. It was reiterated 167 years later in the ratification of the Constitution by the Founding Fathers. They confirmed the divine mission God had started with their forefathers. Of course, this belief in God's role for America didn't all come to pass in their day, but they knew that someday it would. John Adams wrote, "I always consider the settlement of America with a reverence and wonder as the opening scene of a grand design in providence for the illumination of the ignorant and the emancipation of the slavish part of mankind all over the earth." So for me, I see that the Trump-Pence campaign has ushered in a significant change in America, a righting of the ship, so to speak. The American people are again looking at themselves with pride, and they have been given hope by a president that not only believes in the greatness of this country, but who also believes there is a divine purpose for her. And he believes this can only happen if we turn back to the principles that made this country great. During this election cycle, I believe the American eyes have been opened, but I caution there is danger ahead. When a snake is cornered, it strikes back. And the left, who have hijacked this country for the last 70 years and more, are being exposed. They are frightened, and they are acting as we expect, by utilising those very principles I mentioned earlier. This may have worked in the past, but I strongly believe that Mr. Trump, by giving the American people license to speak to the truth again, is providing the voice for change and a call to action. For the last 70 years, we truly have been controlled by men laying in the ground, dead. You think about it. Charles Darwin, Wellhausen, Kyrgyzstan, Keynes, Dewey, Sigmund Freud, Marx. Yeah, G'day Woodrow Wilson. But those men are the pin-up boys of the liberal progressive left. These men are revered today by those people. And Saul Alinsky, in his books Reveille for Radicals and Rules for Radicals, has used their ideological positions to provide the playbook to invade our schools, our colleges, our businesses, our homes, and even the church. And it is what we have allowed, and without a dissenting voice. Why? I ask my fellow Americans. And it's what we have sown that we are now reaping in our colleges. Safe spaces in our highest education centres, where ideological beliefs can only be debated within the ideological framework that they're talking about, not across ideologies. The protests around the country are perfect examples of people who are controlled by ideologues. The riots at Berkeley, Manhattan and Beach and dozens of other locations around the country are an example of people wanting to shut down debate, and therefore the First Amendment. Safe spaces in our universities where debate and alternate ideas outside of those ideological belief systems are crushed. And our founding fathers, who celebrated debate, and you see it right throughout the Federalist Papers, would be just shocked, as I am. But millions of Americans woke up during this last election cycle. And they woke up and started saying right from the beginning he walked down the steps, or rode the escalator down at least on the 15th of June. What the heck has happened to my country? Right across, I saw it. People were saying, what's going on with my country? They're asking the questions. When did we decide that God could no longer be a part of our government institutions? When did we decide that our preachers could no longer preach from the pulpit? That happened in 1954 with the 501c3 status that the churches hooked into, which quietened them because they could no longer speak about politics. Once upon a time, they were the voice of the community. No longer. When did we decide to take prayer and God out of our public education system? 1963. When did we decide that education would be controlled by the federal government? We didn't. When did we decide that marriage was no longer just between a man and a woman? When did we decide that it was okay to no longer register our children in schools under the mum and dad, but under person A and person B? And when did we decide to kill 63 million babies in the womb? I'm often asked, why doesn't your God raise up somebody to fix what's happening in the world? And I say, well, how do you know he didn't? And they say, well, where is this magnificent person. I said, well, maybe you killed them in the womb. And it shuts them up, because they realise that there are people out there that under normal circumstances, when I say normal, I'm talking about liberal progressive circumstances, would not have been born. You think about the Australian that has no arms and no legs. He's got 1 billion ministry. You think about Helen Keller. You think about My Left Foot, the film you might have seen. You think about Lane Beachley, the world champion surfer. Her mother was raped at 17. And they said, you've got to get rid of the baby. And she said, no, I will adopt that person out. That person became Lane Beachley, the world champion surfer. And there are many examples like that across the world. So we don't know who we've killed in the room. So why am I so involved? I have 3 granddaughters, one of whom is with the Lord. And I say to my friends here and in Australia, as goes America, so goes the world. And if you all go over the fiscal cliff, but more importantly, the spiritual cliff, my country is next. And the chance for my children to really know constitutional freedom under God will be gone forever. That gift is a gift given by the American people. In the past 70 years, there has been an incredible push, an agenda to remove God from all aspects of our society. This attack on God is the vanguard of the assault that includes indoctrination of our children in our schools and colleges, the intrusion of government into all aspects of our lives, families, on marriage, and a desire to dismantle elements of the Constitution. It is an attack that seeks to bring America back to the pack which she was never meant to be part of. The offensive against this began on the 16th of June 2015. Got into full advance mode on the 8th of November in 2016 and went into attack mode on the 20th of January this year. It is in full swing, and America's trust in God as an example to the world is again being seen through the moral compass and beacon of hope and light she was, is, and is still meant to be for all mankind. America is, and I say this with a choke, America is the greatest country this world has ever seen. She was never meant to be part of a pack, but a leader. An exceptional nation with exceptional people who for the first time in the history of the world declared and enshrined into the highest law in your land the truth that your freedoms do not come from a king, a queen, a pharaoh, a prime minister, or a president. They come from God, and therefore man cannot take them away. That gift was given by you people to the world, and the world exploded from 1789 to 1969. In 180 years, you went from horse and cart to man on the moon. 5,000 years before that, nothing happened. It was because you people, you exceptional people, declared that your freedoms don't come from man, and therefore they can't be taken away, so you had something to fight for. I truly believe that God has his hand on the till of the USS America, as he always has. But like that which occurs in our own lives, he allows us to be challenged, for our own sake often. We can either listen to him or ignore him. I justly believe the American people have listened and once again are turning their eyes back to God for him to fulfill this great nation's purpose. And we at the grassroots level need to be at the head of that vanguard. We're the platoon commanders, and we need to rally the troops. Like in Joshua and Caleb's time, in the days of Moses, who reported that the land of milk and honey given to them by God is filled with giants, but it's okay, God's on our side. We have our own giants. And our own giants are a corrupt government, an education system that is corrupt and run by liberal progressives that don't believe anything that you guys believe. And they are trying to remove that from our lives. So, we can, as I said, we can either listen to him or not. Or we can be like the 10 that came back and said, the giants are too big for us and we can't go forward. I prefer to trust in God and to believe that he's going to be right there with us, taking back the America that I love, the America that I know you love, and the America that's meant to be a beacon of hope and light for the rest of the world. We need to believe that we have a greater power on our side. Those that for the past 70 years have sought to transform her from a free and prosperous society away from being that beacon of hope and light for the rest of the world, those that want to take us back to a secular country, we need to defeat those people. To do this, though, we need to find voice again. We need to take our land back from the giants and not be afraid, not to be afraid to be labelled. The founding fathers and those that fought for the birthing of this great nation did so under much duress, as we all know. Initially it was a grassroots campaign. We too can be that grassroots campaign that eventually will gain momentum to drive the strategic changes that are required to bring America back. So what can we, the people, do? What can we here do? Well, meetings like this are a great start, but there's much more. And I'll just list a few of the ideas that I've had, that I've presented around the country. We need to identify virtuous candidates, and we need to finance them to win positions on our boards of education and our boards of finance and other town administrative positions. We need to ensure that every assembly district and every congressional district has a virtuous and faith-based person running in that district. And again, we need to finance them, and we need to get the troops out to support them. You see on the TV the left's attempt to disrupt every meeting that we have, the town halls. We need to get our voices back and make the same amount of noise and not be afraid to do it. We need to rally at Democrat town hall meetings, and although it's a little distasteful for us, we need to do exactly what they are doing and get out there in force and make a noise with our cards and say no, just like they do. We need to get behind our county GOP. Now, I know that some Republican counties are not our favourite people because they don't represent what we necessarily represent. They've compromised. But there's a changing tide coming, and that tide will come from the national through the Trump Republican campaign, down through the various state GOPs and into the county GOPs. We should not be afraid to support them. Most important, we need to educate our kids and our grandkids. We need to support them. They are the future. We need to teach them about our history, the things that I'm telling you about now. We need to pass that on to them, to show them the greatness of America, to show them what the forefathers had in mind. It won't happen in our schools. It won't happen in our government institutions. It's going to happen here. We should encourage homeschooling where we can. Homeschooling, I can tell you, the homeschool kids are sought after across the country by universities. Why? Because they have a broad-based education. They are far more articulate, far more well-versed in history than any of those that come from the Ivy schools. And they are sought after. And we should reach out to these schooling groups and put on seminars for them. Teach them. Be prepared to go out and speak to the kids, because they do have combined homeschool days where all the homeschools from the regions come into a particular place. Get out there and talk to them one-on-one if you have to. We should send our children to conservative colleges. If you can afford to pay for your grandkids or your kids to go to conservative colleges, send them. That's where they're going to get educated. true education and true debate. And to tell you the truth, those that go to conservative colleges are again sought after because they have a balanced view of the world. They know that hard work pays off. And for those that don't get an opportunity to go to a conservative school, we should establish a solid conservative network for when they come home so that they can regroup and re-energise, because they are going to be smacked down in those colleges, those liberal progressive colleges. I've got several people that I mentor around the country. Anastasia Lee, if you see this, you're one of them. Anastasia Lee is a young lady that's in her first year of college. She's the number 4 contralto in the world, got a following of 4 million people. Remarkable young lady. She's fighting every day the fight that we should be helping her to fight. The fight that we should take up on a political level, not just at home, not just in our local community. We should get our voice back again. And we should consider funding scholarships as a group. Fund a conservative kid to go to a college and show them that you have their backs. Show them that you're willing to put in the hard yards for their future. That, to tell you the truth, we let the enemy have. Because we, and I include me in this, did not have a voice for the last 70 years when we should have, and we should have been fighting back against what was happening in this great country. I'd like to finish with my favourite verse in my favourite patriotic song. I'd sing it to you, but I'll bear you that pain. And it goes like this. O beautiful for pilgrims' feet, whose stern impassioned stress a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God, shed thine every flaw, and clothe thy soul. Don't get the government to do it. Don't get anybody else to do it. Clothe your soul, thy soul, in self-control. Thy liberty in law. Your Constitution is protecting your liberty. And if we let the Constitution be pulled apart by those that want to pull it apart, your liberty is gone. May God bless you, and may God bless America.